Good evening and welcome to After Hours. Joining us this evening is Ben West, who is a campaigner with the, I was going to say Western Wilderness Committee. So just to clarify, it is Wilderness Committee.
Yes.
I think it was once WC squared, and so what's happened with all that?
Well, the Wilderness Committee is now about 30 years old. We used to be called the Western Canada Wilderness Committee when the vast majority of what we were doing was in British Columbia. But since that time, we've opened offices elsewhere in Canada. So we dropped the Western Canada part, and now we're just the Wilderness Committee.
And what kind of organization are you? Do you have members, or you're non-for-profit probably?
Yeah, we are a non-for-profit, a charitable organization. We have about 60,000 members and supporters across Canada. We're actually Canada's largest membership-based wilderness preservation organization, which is great because it means that we've got a lot of autonomy to really organize our campaigns the way that we think they should be organized. We're not dependent on grants or big donations. We can really sort of operate completely autonomous of sort of outside influence.
Never mind that people support you, obviously, too, which is in your philosophies or how you deal with things. I think you used to have a store. Do you also still have a store?
We used to have two storefronts, one in Vancouver and one in Victoria. We've now shut both of those down to focus on our campaign activities, although we still sell all the stuff that we used to sell, like our postcards and our calendars and other stuff that you can see on our website. We do mostly through mail order and through the web now, to really just kind of focus on what we're doing. Yeah.
So what is your mandate?
Well, we're a research and education body first and foremost. We do a little bit of advocacy work, but primarily what we do is we do research and kind of grassroots engagement. So we host town hall meetings. We will write reports, and then we'll sort of engage the community around those reports. And we try to be quite strategic about sort of what we take on. We try to take on issues that are where there's a very clear connection to communities, where there's the ability to engage community directly. And where we can make a difference by sort of looking at issues that perhaps are not getting enough focus or could use more support.
Are there certain issues or types of issues you deal with? I think in the past you've dealt with like animal issues as well as, whether it be forest issues. Talk a bit about that, like what you might pick.
Well, the Wilderness Committee started out as very much a wilderness preservation organization, and then moved into sort of habitat for species. What the work that I do is kind of a new thing, and new meaning like the last 7 to 10 years really of the Wilderness Committee. I guess you could say I'm kind of the urban campaigner of the Wilderness Committee. So my job title is Healthy Communities Campaigner, which basically means I organize campaigns around toxins and climate change. But I think what's interesting about how the Wilderness Committee approaches these kinds of campaigns is we try to learn from the experiences that we had in campaigns in Clayoquot Sound and the Idaho Valley and other places. So instead of focusing on big international agreements or those kind of negotiations of the United Nations, as important as that is, we try to do very much kind of grassroots community organizing. So when it comes to the issue of pipelines and tankers, which is what I'm working on right now, our strategy is to be on the ground and in the community, right at the front lines, like along the routes of the proposed pipelines, around where the tankers will actually be.
Where the people are and whether it's happening. And you must have a history, too, to build on. Like, do you have a history to build on with your contact in the past dealing with issues?
You mean me personally?
Well, the organization and you personally as well.
Yeah, that's one of the real strengths of being a membership-based organization is we have a lot of contacts in the community, and for 30 years now, the organization's been quite active on the ground in communities. So one of the interesting things that you see happen is, you fight one campaign, and whether you win or lose, you've got a new sort of set of allies who have, a heightened level of sort of ecological awareness as well as, community organizing experience. Much of the work that we do is really about empowering community groups and individuals in communities to be able to sort of fight to protect their own communities. We do a lot of different campaigns, so we'd never be able to do all of that if we did all the work ourselves. So a lot of what we do is actually sort of training and facilitating, providing resources to community groups.
So when you say you do research, who are your researchers and where does the research come from?
It's a mix. The campaigners themselves, like myself, there's about a half dozen of us, do a lot of our own research, but we also partner with, sometimes we have interns and volunteers who help us on specific topics. And there's also, many other researchers out there in the world, like at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives and other groups like that, that we draw upon their research, as well as many of these community groups. There's folks who will do tremendous amounts of research in their own communities to try to ensure that they can protect their communities. So like everything from mapping watersheds to, looking at, shareholder issues or whatever it might be. There's kind of people out there who really have a hunger for information, and really we just try to help facilitate all these different people who are doing this kind of work coming together, so we're not reinventing the wheel and we're sharing information.
Okay, so why did you get involved in the Wilderness Committee?
Well, it was actually one of the first jobs I got when I moved to British Columbia was going door to door for the Wilderness Committee. I actually canvassed for both the Wilderness Committee and for Greenpeace, and both experiences were positive. But there was something that really appealed to me about the sort of grassroots approach that the Wilderness Committee took. As much as I am a fan of the work that Greenpeace does internationally, something about doing local community organizing really spoke to me. It just seemed like to be the kind of work I was interested in doing. And then about 10 years later, after going back to school and then a number of other jobs and things I got involved in between, I decided coming out of college, I actually worked for the Green Party for a little while and was a candidate a few different times, and one thing led to another, and I kind of decided that really where I wanted to be was working for an NGO, and a job just happened to be opening up at the Wilderness Committee.
And there you were.
And there I was, and here I am.
So it seems to me that the environment and the issues that the Wilderness Committee and other organizations deal with is non-ending. And sometimes it seems to me it's like getting worse. But what positive changes have you seen through your work there?
Well, I mean, community organizing is beneficial in and of itself. Like I was saying just a second ago, I mean, even if you lose a campaign, seeing a group of people become empowered and have a higher capacity and get to know their communities is really relevant and has really lasting impacts, I think. I have seen us win some campaigns. I mean, just in the few things I've worked on at the Wilderness Committee, I mean, we helped protect the UBC farm, which was a pretty exciting thing to be a part of. And we've seen at least a reduction in harm in some of the other campaigns I've been involved in. Like, I mean, as much as I would have liked to have stopped the Gateway Highway project that was proposed in Surrey and Delta and is still in the midst of being built as we speak, we have seen an increased awareness, more funding for public transit, and a whole bunch of communities that are quite organized, as well as sort of pushing the highway away from some of the worst places, although there's still a lot of work that needs to be done there. And in the broader sense, I mean, the Wilderness Committee, beyond the time that I've been there, has, protected a number of areas around the province, has been, quite involved in things like Ilaho and Clayoquot Sound and many of these places that were, huge fights in the last few decades of the province. And, has, I think in some ways you could really say it's an organization that's a giant killer. I mean, we fight against these massive corporations with, tremendous amounts of power and influence, and this relatively small organization, I mean, by contrast, has got quite a inspiring history, I think. And of course, we don't win every campaign, but
and a strong voice.
And a really strong voice, yeah, and I think a necessary one.
So, can our treatment of the planet on various levels, can it keep going the way it's going?
Well, I mean, the path we're on right now is fundamentally unsustainable. We are very dependent on non-renewable resources, and we're extracting them at an ever-increasing and alarming rate. We're in an era now of climate change.
Which not all people believe that's true, but you can see it happening.
Well,
it happening.
It's interesting that you bring up the sort of, the level of public opinion. In Canada, the vast majority are concerned about climate change. What they're prepared to do about it is a whole other question. But in the United States, we actually saw a big dip in concern, largely as the end result of a very well-funded, largely funded by companies like Exxon, this big campaign to try to seed doubt, basically. There's a great book actually called Merchants of Doubt that looks at how there's very similar tactics that were used by the tobacco industry to try to convince people that secondhand smoke wasn't an issue, that's now been applied to this fight around global warming. This is part of the reason why the Wilderness Committee is focusing so much on specific things we can do about climate change, as opposed to just sort of focusing on the idea of climate change. We're saying, okay, well, we're not going to wait for our leaders to lead, because obviously that's not happening. So let's look at things like oil tankers and oil pipelines. And quite frankly, I mean, there's a lot of people who may not be motivated by climate change, but they're sure concerned about oil spills and other issues. And you can do quite meaningful things to stop the causes of climate change, even if it isn't necessarily climate change that's motivating people.
So who is Kinder Morgan, and what has he been doing in our waters?
Well, Kinder Morgan is the biggest pipeline company in the world. They're second only to the government of Russia. And they're a company made up of two former Enron executives, Richard Kinder and Bill Morgan, who were lucky enough to leave Enron before the House of Cards fell, and many of the chief executives ended up in prison. They took about $20 million each out of Enron, and took a Enron Liquid Pipelines LLP, which was a shell corporation, I guess you could say, of Enron, and started this new pipeline company, Kinder Morgan, which very quickly acquired a number of other pipeline entities, and now this company, Kinder Morgan, has bought up the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which is the pipeline that runs from Alberta to Burnaby. And has been the source of about 90% of our oil that we use in British Columbia for the last 60 some odd years. Interesting thing about this, though, is that they've very much transformed this pipeline. We've only been extracting large amounts of oil from the tar sands of the oil sands since about 2003. They bought the pipeline in 2005, and very quickly have been trying to change it into an export pipeline. Increasingly we're seeing more and more of that oil and increasingly bitumen in its diluted form being moved through this pipeline, so a very different kind of product than we'd seen historically. And increasingly we're actually refining less and less oil in the Vancouver area and exporting more of it as raw crude. Some of it going down to California, about 2/3 of it going down to California, being brought back to us in tankers to consume. But since about 2007, 2008, we've actually seen exports to Asia. And now their new plan is to build a whole new pipeline. They call it a twinning, but I think the reasonable way to look at it is they want to build a whole new pipeline, which is about the same size as the Enbridge pipeline in the north, which people have probably heard more about, that would run parallel to the existing pipeline that they bought, and would drastically transform what we see happening in our inlet.
So why would they want to double it? And why is this happening now?
Money. Simple answer. I mean, there's a lot of money to be made in the export of oil. Kinder Morgan's a very smart company. I mean, we're talking about Richard Kinder's now about the 100th richest man on planet Earth. He's got $8.6 billion in personal net wealth. So, I mean, we talk a lot about the 1% and the 99%. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better spokesperson for the 1%. This oil executive is basically, what he's done is he's bought a pipeline route, and that, I think, gives him the impression that because there's an existing right-of-way, an existing tanker export facility, that they're going to be able to have a much easier time building this new pipeline than Enbridge will in the north or Keystone has in the United States, because they're calling it a twinning of an existing set of infrastructure, but of course for a very different purpose.